I'm Thomas, your host, coming to you from Portland, Oregon. We're going to listen to these great texts and read them slowly, for study, for reflection, or simply to drift away. If you feel so inclined, like, share, and subscribe. Settle in, and let's begin. A man writes to us from the calm of a private asylum, where he has checked himself in of his own free will, and he badly wants to explain why. One evening, he came home late to his house in Normandy and heard a stirring inside. And then out of the darkness of his own doorway, his furniture began to leave. Armchairs, cabinets, his writing desks, the sofa he loved, all filing out into the night and down the garden path in a long, orderly procession, as if each piece had somewhere it needed to be. This is one of the last stories Guy de Maupassant ever wrote, published in 1897, and it has the airless logic of a nightmare you cannot wake from. He does not scream, he stands still and lets them pass. What he does afterward, the searching, the strange shop in Rouen, the thing he glimpses there, turns a haunting into something worse. The fear that the world has quietly stopped obeying its own rules and only you have noticed. Who knows, he kept asking. Who knows? Who knows? By Guy de Maupassant, published 1897.
If I were not perfectly sure of what I have seen, sure that there was not in my reasoning any defect, any error in my declarations, any lacuna in the inflexible sequence of my observations, I should believe myself to be the dupe of a simple hallucination, the sport of a singular vision. After all, who knows? Yesterday I was in a private asylum, but I went there voluntarily, out of prudence and fear. Only one single human being knows my history, and that is the doctor of the said asylum. I am going to write to him. I really do not know why, to disembarrass myself. Yea, I feel as though weighed down by an intolerable nightmare. Let me explain. I have always been a recluse, a dreamer, a kind of isolated philosopher, easygoing, content with but little, harboring ill feeling against no man, and without even a grudge against heaven. I have constantly lived alone. Consequently, a kind of torture takes hold of me when I find myself in the presence of others. How is this to be explained? I do not know. I am not averse to going out into the world, to conversation, to dining with friends, but when they are near me for any length of time, even the most intimate of them, they bore me, fatigue me, enervate me, and I experience an overwhelming, torturing desire to see them get up and go, to take themselves away and to leave me by myself. That desire is more than a craving. It is an irresistible necessity. And if the presence of people with whom I find myself were to be continued, if I were compelled not only to listen but also to follow for any length of time their conversation, a serious accident would assuredly take place. What kind of accident? Ah, who knows? Perhaps a slight paralytic stroke? Probably. I like solitude so much that I cannot even endure the vicinage of other beings sleeping under the same roof. I cannot live in Paris, because there I suffer the most acute agony. I lead a moral life, and am therefore tortured in body and in nerves by that immense crowd which swarms and lives even when it sleeps. Ah, the sleeping of others is more painful still than their conversation, and I can never find repose when I know and feel that on the other side of a wall several existences are undergoing these regular eclipses of reason. Why am I thus? Who knows? The cause of it is very simple, perhaps. I get tired very soon of everything that does not emanate from me, and there are many people in similar case. We are on earth two distinct races. Those who have need of others, whom others amuse, engage, soothe, whom solitude harasses, pains, stupefies, like the movement of a terrible glacier or the traversing of the desert, and those, on the contrary, whom others weary, tire, bore, silently torture, whom isolation calms and bathes in the repose of independency, and plunges into the humors of their own thoughts. In fine, there is here a normal physical phenomenon. Some are constituted to live a life outside of themselves, others, to live a life within themselves. As for me, my exterior associations are abruptly and painfully short-lived, and as they reach their limits, I experience in my whole body and in my whole intelligence an intolerable uneasiness. As a result of this, I became attached, or rather had become much attached, to inanimate objects, which have for me the importance of beings, and my house has or had become a world in which I lived an active and solitary life, surrounded by all manner of things, furniture, familiar knickknacks, as sympathetic in my eyes as the visages of human beings. I had filled my mansion with them. Little by little I had adorned it with them, and I felt an inward content and satisfaction, was more happy than if I had been in the arms of a beloved girl, whose wonted caresses had become a soothing and delightful necessity. I had had this house constructed in the center of a beautiful garden, which hid it from the public highways, and which was near the entrance to a city where I could find, on occasion, the resources of society, for which at moments I had a longing. All my domestics slept in a separate building, which was situated at some considerable distance from my house, at the far end of the kitchen garden, which in turn was surrounded by a high wall. The obscure envelopment of night in the silence of my concealed habitation, buried under the leaves of great trees, was so reposeful and so delicious that before retiring to my couch I lingered every evening for several hours in order to enjoy the solitude a little longer. One day Signat had been played at one of the city theaters. It was the first time that I had listened to that beautiful, musical, and fairy-like drama, and I had derived from it the liveliest pleasures. I returned home on foot with a light step, my head full of sonorous phrases, and my mind haunted by delightful visions. It was night, the dead of night, and so dark that I could hardly distinguish the broad highway, and consequently I stumbled into the ditch more than once. From the custom house, at the barriers, to my house, was about a mile, perhaps a little more, a leisurely walk of about 20 minutes. It was 1 o'clock in the morning, 1 o'clock or maybe 1:30. The sky had by this time cleared somewhat, and the crescent appeared, the gloomy crescent of the last quarter of the moon. The crescent of the first quarter is that which rises about 5 or 6 o'clock in the evening, and is clear, gay, and fretted with silver. But the one which rises after midnight is reddish, sad, and desolating. It is the true Sabbath crescent. Every prowler by night has made the same observation. The first, though slender as a thread, throws a faint, joyous light which rejoices the heart and lines the ground with distinct shadows. The last sheds hardly a dying glimmer, and is so wan that it occasions hardly any shadows. In the distance I perceive the somber mass of my garden, and, I know not why, was seized with a feeling of uneasiness at the idea of going inside. I slackened my pace and walked very softly, the thick cluster of trees having the appearance of a tomb in which my house was buried. I opened my outer gate and entered the long avenue of sycamores which ran in the direction of the house, arranged vault-wise like a high tunnel, traversing opaque masses, and winding round the turf lawns on which baskets of flowers in the pale darkness could be indistinctly discerned. While approaching the house, I was seized by a strange feeling. I could hear nothing. I stood still. Through the trees there was not even a breath of air stirring. What is the matter with me? I said to myself. For 10 years I had entered and re-entered in the same way, without ever experiencing the least inquietude. I never had any fear at nights. The sight of a man, a marauder, or a thief would have thrown me into a fit of anger, and I would have rushed at him without any hesitation. Moreover, I was armed. I had my revolver, but I did not touch it, for I was anxious to resist that feeling of dread with which I was seized. What was it? Was it a presentiment? That mysterious presentiment which takes hold of the senses of men who have witnessed something which to them is inexplicable? Perhaps. Who knows? In proportion as I advanced, I felt my skin quiver more and more, and when I was close to the wall, near the outhouses of my large residence, I felt that it would be necessary for me to wait a few minutes before opening the door and going inside. I sat down then on a bench under the windows of my drawing room. I rested there, a little disturbed, with my head leaning against the wall, my eyes wide open, under the shade of the foliage. For the first few minutes I did not observe anything unusual around me. I had a humming noise in my ears, but that has happened often to me. Sometimes it seemed to me that I heard trains passing, that I heard clocks striking, that I heard a multitude on the march. Very soon, those humming noises became more distinct, more concentrated, more determinable. I was deceiving myself. It was not the ordinary tingling of my arteries which transmitted to my ears these rumbling sounds, but it was a very distinct, though confused noise which came, without any doubt whatever, from the interior of my house. Through the walls I distinguished this continued noise. I should rather say agitation than noise, an indistinct moving about of a pile of things, as if people were tossing about, displacing and carrying away surreptitiously all my furniture. I doubted, however, for some considerable time yet, the evidence of my ears. But having placed my ear against one of the outhouses, the better to discover what this strange disturbance was inside my house, I became convinced, certain, that something was taking place in my residence which was altogether abnormal and incomprehensible. I had no fear, but I was, how shall I express it, paralyzed by astonishment. I did not draw my revolver, knowing very well that there was no need of my doing so. I listened a long time, but could come to no resolution, my mind being quite clear, though in myself I was naturally anxious. I got up and waited, listening always to the noise which gradually increased, and at intervals grew very loud, and which seemed to become an impatient, angry disturbance, a mysterious commotion. Then, suddenly, ashamed of my timidity, I seized my bunch of keys. I selected the one I wanted, guided it into the lock, turned it twice, and pushing the door with all my might, sent it banging against the partition. The collision sounded like the report of a gun, and there responded to that explosive noise, from roof to basement of my residence, a formidable tumult. It was so sudden, so terrible, so deafening, that I recoiled a few steps, and though I knew it to be wholly useless, I pulled my revolver out of its case. I continued to listen for some time longer. I could distinguish now an extraordinary pattering upon the steps of my grand staircase, on the waxed floors, on the carpets, not of boots or of naked feet, but of iron and wooden crutches, which resounded like cymbals. Then I suddenly discerned, on the threshold of my door, an armchair, my large reading easy chair, which set off waddling. It went away through my garden. Others followed it, those of my drawing room, then my sofas, dragging themselves along like crocodiles on their short paws. Then all my chairs, bounding like goats, and the little footstools, hopping like rabbits. Oh, what a sensation! I slunk back into a clump of bushes where I remained crouched up, watching, meanwhile, my furniture defile past. For everything walked away, the one behind the other, briskly or slowly, according to its weight or size. My piano, my grand piano, bounded past with the gallop of a horse and a murmur of music in its sides. The smaller articles slid along the gravel like snails, my brushes, crystal, cups and saucers, which glistened in the moonlight. I saw my writing desk appear, a rare curiosity of the last century, which contained all the letters I had ever received, all the history of my heart, an old history from which I have suffered so much. Besides, there were inside of it a great many cherished photographs. Suddenly, I no longer had any fear. I threw myself on it, seized it as one would seize a thief, as one would seize a wife about to run away, but it pursued its irresistible course, and despite my efforts and despite my anger, I could not even its pace. As I was resisting in desperation that insuperable force, I was thrown to the ground. It then rolled me over, trailed me along the gravel, and the rest of my furniture which followed it began to march over me, tramping on my legs and injuring them. When I loosed my hold, other articles had passed over my body, just as a charge of cavalry does over the body of a dismounted soldier. Seized at last with terror, I succeeded in dragging myself out of the main avenue, and in concealing myself again among the shrubbery, so as to watch the disappearance of the most cherished objects, the smallest, the least striking, the least unknown which had once belonged to me. I then heard, in the distance, noises which came from my apartments, which sounded now as if the house were empty, a loud noise of shutting of doors, They were being slammed from top to bottom of my dwelling, even the door which I had just opened myself unconsciously, and which had closed of itself when the last thing had taken its departure. I took flight also, running toward the city, and only regained my self-composure on reaching the boulevards where I met belated people. I rang the bell of a hotel where I was known. I had knocked the dust off my clothes with my hands, and I told the porter that I had lost my bunch of keys, which included also that to the kitchen garden where my servants slept in a house standing by itself, on the other side of the wall of the enclosure which protected my fruits and vegetables from the raids of marauders. I covered myself up to the eyes in the bed which was assigned to me, but could not sleep, and I waited for the dawn, listening to the throbbing of my heart. I had given orders that my servants were to be summoned to the hotel at daybreak, and my valet de chambre knocked at my door at 7 o'clock in the morning. His countenance bore a woeful look. "A great misfortune has happened during the night, monsieur," said he. "What is it?" "Somebody has stolen the whole of monsieur's furniture, all, everything, even to the smallest articles." This news pleased me. Why? Who knows? I was complete master of myself, bent on dissimulating, on telling no one of anything I had seen, determined on concealing and in burying in my heart of hearts a terrible secret. I responded, "They must then be the same people who have stolen my keys. The police must be informed immediately. I am going to get up, and I will join you in a few moments." The investigation into the circumstances under which the robbery might have been committed lasted for 5 months. Nothing was found, not even the smallest of my knickknacks, nor the least trace of the thieves. Good gracious, if I had only told them what I knew, if I had said, I should have been locked up. I, not the thieves, for I was the only person who had seen everything from the first. Yes, but I knew how to keep silence. I shall never refurnish my house. That were indeed useless. The same thing would happen again. I had no desire even to re-enter the house, and I did not re-enter it. I never visited it again. I moved to Paris, to the hotel, and consulted doctors in regard to the condition of my nerves, which had disquieted me a good deal ever since that awful night. They advised me to travel, and I followed their counsel.